Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the second part of the first video about the changes in Identity Manager version 7. After we talked about the modularity in Identity Manager 7 and the reason why R&D decided to break the whole tool into pieces, in this video session I want to talk with you about main database changes, and I want to show you the installation of the new Identity Manager. I'm completely aware of that I cannot show you every database change that happens because nearly everything has changed, but I want to start with some main changes and I want to show you some other changes later in some other videos. Have fun with that part. To select every time the correct stuff we want to install, like in every setup set, we have to select them from a list. That means there are some parts of an installation we can select during the installation. For example, we can decide to install a server service, or we want to install only the administration front ends. Whatever, in the past, in version 6 of the Identity Manager, we have had the choice between three different parts of the installation. That was the service part, that was the Fed client installation part, and it was the web application. In version 7, we have inserted something that is called deployment targets. Deployment targets allows you to assign files to a much more granular structure than before. And these deployment targets will be used during the installation, just as a selection, or during using the software loader to insert new files into the database. Additionally to that, the auto update feature will as well use these deployment targets. Deployment targets are defined in a table that is named QBM deployment target. And standardly they are delivered from our R&D developers. One of the most overwhelming things that confuses me a lot is that in the new setup set I have to select 2 times modules and components. As an IT admin than I know that standard in a setup set is just to have one selection list where I can select whatever I want to install. With Identity Manager 7, it is necessary to do that twice, and the reason is like follows. In the first screen, I have to select the modules I want to select. For example, I want to select the Active Directory edition, and additionally to the Active Directory edition, I want to select Exchange and SharePoint support, which are 2 additional modules. On the second screen, I have to select what I want to install. For example, the server service, or the client front ends, or both. Whatever, we need both, and I want to show you the first step in such a setup. Therefore, I step to my setup DVD, which is here on the screen, and open the Autorun exe. Once the Autorun exe is open, I see here a new Dell branding, which is pretty nice. There are many options, you know. One of them is the installation option, and clicking on the installation option, I will see 4 setup sets. The first 3 are according to our editions. Here is the Active Directory edition, the Data Governance edition, and the full-blown Identity Manager. The last one is the installation for the web application, which has to be done locally on the IIS server, and it is completely independent from which edition you are working with, because the web application is the same for every edition. Let's start here with the Active Directory edition, which is quite limited and fast. I click on the installation setup set and get the setup installer. Just for the Active Directory edition, I can select the language. English works pretty good for me, so I step on next, and now I can select 2 options. First of all, on the top I see the source where I'm installing from, which is my network share where that setup DVD lives. The second 2 options are the selected installation modules from database option, which is pretty helpful and very needful if I want to install something in addition to a complete installed version. For example, I want to install a new admin machine with some admin front ends or something like that. If I check that, the setup set itself detects from the existing database which module configuration and which module structure I have installed. On my example here to install something initially, that checkbox makes no sense because initially there is no database there where I can select something from. The second option, it's an option that allows me to install more modules. My selection, remember please before, one Identity Manager Active Directory edition just gives me the standard selection for the Active Directory edition. But if I want to install something more, For example, I want to install Exchange or SharePoint, I have to check that box in addition. Now I click on Next and get the module selection list. For example, I can select Microsoft Exchange and Microsoft SharePoint, which at the end will me cost nothing because it is part of the fee for the Active Directory edition. Be careful with that screen because now I can as well select, for example, business roles, system roles, and something like that. But if I do so, I will automatically get something that will be not an Active Directory edition anymore, and that will higher the price. There is no control that don't allow that because we at the end as the company wants to give you the chance to install something more than only the stuff you originally wanted to pay. And this is because we are always happy to get a little bit more money for a little bit more features. I click on Next and get now the second screen. This screen here is the deployment target screen. Here I can just select which kind of front ends or something else I want to have. For example, I can install the complete workstation components, the server components, I can install the documentation or not, and I can install the web service if I want to. For that specific scenario, I will just let all the stuff like it is checked and install everything. And I want to do that as a 64-bit version because that is faster and nicer to use. Next. Now the setup set is doing whatever the setup set is doing, for example, copying binary files. And after that, it returns and tells me I have now the option to configure a server service, which is necessary or possible because I've installed server service components. And I can start the configuration wizard. And the configuration wizard is important to start or to install my database. Running the configuration wizard, the configuration wizard appears and I can now select install a new database or update an existing one. I want to install a new one for my Active Directory edition. I have to select as well the SQL Server. My SQL Server is AIM-SO2 in this installation. And I need my SQL user for that, which is SVC because it's a service account, then Identity and Access Management and SQL. That is my SQL user with a password. And clicking on Next, I can step on the next screen where I can get a database name suggestion. I want to say that is my one Active Directory edition database. All the stuff is predefined. Installation sources already selected. I have the option, like on every of these screens, to go to advanced configuration if I want to. Sometimes I see a little bit more, sometimes not, like in this screen. Next. And now I'm able here to configure some more modules if I want to do that. The pre-selection is just the stuff that is already selected. This is because you can upgrade a database with the same wizard and then you can just install some more modules. So I step on Next. And after the database is inserted, I can now start with the standard screens you already know. For example, I can here brand the database with the company name. I can as well create my first system users. I can edit my system groups, which was possible in 6x as well. If I uncheck advanced, it disappears. And after that, the whole database gets completely installed with the schema, all the files gets uploaded, and the database gets compiled, as you have seen that in the past as well. All that old stuff have not to be discussed, and because of that, here the difference between the old and the new setup set ends. Well, a good question may be how we should navigate in the complete new database model. Therefore, please remember our module structure we have seen before. Here it is. And you can see here in the module structure, for example, configuration modules and target systems, synchronization modules, the identity manager base module, and so on. A lot of different modules, and all of them are starting with that 3-digit prefix here. And this 3-digit prefix is something we can find in the data model as well. If I step into my object browser, for example, for Active Directory, you have seen that a little bit here on the right. You will find, as usual, and this is the same then in version 6, the table structure that shows you Active Directory tables. Here they are. This is quite standard, a little bit more, I will say, advanced and a little bit more new. It's, for example, DPR, which is our target system synchronization model. And if I go to DPR, a little bit down below, DPR, here they are, then you see a lot of different tables starting with DPR. This is the model part that is Target System Synchronization module. And you see the same thing for other things, for example, QBM as configuration module. So QBM should be underneath of Q. There it is, and you see a lot of more tables here. The question is, what happens with all the non-modular named tables? For example, if you look here, for example, on ACC product information, or here AE role or attestation and whatever. I have not a really answer for that because I'm learning as you how version 7 works at present. But my expectation is that we can select and deselect modules during the setup set. And if we deselect modules, the tables will be missing. And all other tables who are not starting with that 3-digit prefix will automatically be installed in the database. This is my expectation. I'm not quite sure if that is the truth, but it looks like that. Another kind of tables are the dialog tables. Remember the old configuration tables out of the Identity Manager. These dialog tables exist as well, and my expectation here is that these dialog tables will be part of every installation. All the other stuff we have to explore together, and we will figure it out from version to version. One of the very new concepts is the concept of the new UIDs in one Identity Manager. If you look on the screen, you can see standard UIDs on the left side. These are 32 digits character strings, just divided by some dashes that at the end blows up the complete set on 38 characters. In addition to that, in the past, we have had sometimes some fixed UIDs. An example of these fixed UIDs is displayed just below, which shows you a default AE role structure admin attestation UID. The second one was every time transportable because it was existing in each system in the same way. The first one, the standard UID, was not able to be transported because it was a UID that was auto-generated by the SQL Server system every time a new object was inserted. With that, it is possible, for example, to store the same object or the same named object in two different databases, having two different UID. Because of that, we have needed something that was called alternatively primary keys, and these alternative primary keys was necessary to identify the same object on a transport that was stored with another UID in another system. Very new now with version 7, we have module depending and self-made UIDs for everything. That means we don't use the standard feature to create UIDs anymore. We have modified that to a specific system that creates always Identity Manager based UIDs. If you look on the right side of the screen, you will see something like the ADS, then the dash, and whatever else character string are the UIDs. These UIDs are as long as the UIDs before, but we have replaced 3 of the dashes by the module prefix. Together with one additional dash, this will now automatically be a prefix that converts that automatically generated UID to a fixed UID, which is now transportable. In addition to these standard, or let me say Identity Manager standard UIDs, we have as well the complete named UIDs like before. They as well show the typical module prefix and then some characters that makes that UID to a specific one as well. The good message now is that with this new concept we are now able to transport UIDs from one system to another system. A pretty new concept as well is the concept of the new DBQ Processor. We have never heard about it, and this doesn't wonder, because the new DBQ Processor is something that replaces the old database scheduler. The reason for the new DBQ Processor is that we need something that is much more performant, and the only way to get more performance into that calculation tool is to parallelize the operations. This is exactly what the new DBQ Processor is doing. The DBQ Processor works more or less at the following. As you know, there is the dialog DBQ that exists as well in version 7, and this dialog DBQ contains calculation jobs. There is a starter process named QBM PDB QProcessor main, And this starter process is just taking the work out of the dialog DBQ and it's assigning that work to slot processes. Slot processes are replacing the old DB scheduler, and you can have more of them than just one. The number of slot processes is given during the installation, and it depends standardly on the power and performance of your hardware. Once these jobs are assigned to the slot processes are just storing that stuff in the QBM DBQ current as before, working on the slot processes and returning to the DBQ current the success on the calculation jobs after they have finished their calculation. The effect of the calculation will have impact on the used data as before. In difference to the process before, the slot process itself are not deleting the done jobs, that means the finished jobs, out of the QBM DBQ current. Therefore exists as well a cleanup process, which typically deletes these finished processes out of the DBQ current. The reason for that additional process is that sometimes, because of the hard-working slot processes, these records are not really free to get deleted, and to minimize the number of database blockings, they get automatically be deleted by a scheduled process. And if it's not possible to delete them on the first run, then the next run will kill them as well. At the end, this is a very, very fast new system. And it is as well a system where the DB scheduler, or let me better say the DBQ processor, sleeps not anymore. Remember, in the past the DB scheduler was running in a 5-minute schedule, but only if the system was in idle mode. With the new DBQ processor, this calculation process is sleeping never. Slot processes are triggered by the starter process, and the starter process is the only one that sometimes gets resetted. It's a very new technology, and it is pretty fast. It is much faster than all the other stuff you have ever seen, and it minimizes the number of minutes or seconds you have to wait until something is calculated. It is typically not so easy to show you a working DBQ processor, and the reason for that is there's not a lot of things to see. Typically, if you switch, for example, to the DbQ info and you want to monitor here the DBQ will be empty, and the reason for that is the DBQ processor was just faster as you expect. Additionally to that, it may make of interest that the standard feature to double-click the database and to activate the DB scheduler, like in the past, doesn't exist in the One Identity Manager version 7 anymore. The reason for that is it makes no sense to see that screen. And it makes absolutely no sense to start the DBQ processor because this process is not sleeping anymore. So a new start will exactly have no impact on the always running tool. What you can see instead is just the place where the DBQ processor is stored. And this is on the SQL Server level, just as SQL Server agent jobs. So if I expand SQL Server agent, you will see here some jobs. One of them is the starter process, which is the DBQ processor main. And then you see here 6 slot processes calculated during the initial installation of my database based on the server performance. And you see as well the DBQ processor deleter, which is responsible to delete finished jobs out of the dialog DBQ current. At the end, there is one other process, that is the QBM PBP watchdog process, which takes care that all of these processes works all the time pretty good. On the database level, you will find all the typical tables you know from the past. There's the dialog DBQ, which just contains the jobs initially. There's the QBM DBQ current that replaces the dialog DBQ current and shows the jobs who get accessed by the slot process at present. And there are some other tables having to do with that complete process. A QBM DBQ overview that shows you just the overview of the jobs. A slots table that contains all existing slots in the database. A table QBM DBQ task, which contains all existing DBQ processor tasks. There are dependencies defined into other tables for these tasks. And at the end, there's a QBM DBQ task has schedule that auto-schedules some of these tasks. From a product perspective, the DBQ processor is faster, and it is absolutely less vulnerable than the old DB scheduler. And the reason for that is it is nearly not possible to manually impact on the work of the DB scheduler.